control.
Very good point, brother. Now then, for anyone who doesn't know, let me be professional for a moment and introduce today's special guest. He's been on the show once before. You know that I work with him every Sunday as well over on Warrior Mode, but maybe, and I like to think we always get a new listener along the way, maybe you haven't heard of Travis Shortt before. Well, Travis Shortt has been interested in the paranormal, supernatural, and occult since a very young age. Now, he trained early in his life to be a minister. He holds a degree in English with a concentration in communication from the University of Virginia's College at Wise. And it goes on to say that he has professional background in broadcasting, marketing, and public relations. And he currently serves, well, I'm not sure if he's still serving as that. He works on numerous radio stations that we'll hear about in a moment. But he's also part of a project that maybe some of you have heard about before, but it's going to be coming your way again. And that's what's really going to be the basis, the launch pad for our conversation with Travis today, because Dark Wings, the Mothman Chronicle, this is something that I know Travis is resurrecting. And how is that going, Mr. Travis?
It is, it's slowed down a little bit here the past few months because the day job that pays the bills has kept me rather busy. So definitely still looking at having this launched. I had originally planned, I wanted to have something out there around December 15th, which was the anniversary of the collapse of the Silver Bridge there in Point Pleasant, which kind of was the culmination of the original Mothman sightings. That didn't happen, but we are moving forward with getting the documentary out there. The original documentary that was released in 2009, as well as a newer version with some added bonuses, some photographs from behind the scenes that we didn't include, photographs from my most recent trip with my daughter and her squad back in July, where we went up to Point Pleasant and retraced Dad's steps, and shot a few interesting videos there with my daughter and her friends. So that will be coming down the pipe this upcoming year. 2020 is just one of those years I'm just like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I
mean, even Point Pleasant, they even cancelled the annual get-together, the annual Mothman get-together. That's indicative of the times we live in, you know?
It really is, because the very first festival took place right after 9/11 in 2001. So they, even after the terrorist attacks, they went ahead and had the inaugural Mothman festival, and they've had it every year until this year. But that was the case with everything. I mean, I lost my World Chicken Festival here in southeastern Kentucky.
You don't take a Kentucky man's chicken festival away.
Well, you took this one away. COVID killed the Chicken Festival, and it's a huge festival. It draws around 200,000 people from all over the world.
That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money for the local economy, you know?
So it is the single biggest event in southeastern Kentucky.
You boys like your chickens over there, eh?
We do like our chickens. We do.
Nothing wrong with that, actually, Travis. Nothing wrong with that. Now let me ask you then. Let me ask you though. Talk to us about the Mothman. Give us the kind of the facts on the initial origin story of Mothman, and then what I'd like to do is ask you, now that you're working on it again, do you think after all these years there may be still new information to uncover from some of the sources that may have witnessed something back in the day?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for having me on the show. Always a pleasure.
You don't have to thank me, man. You can be a part of the furniture. It's like having a friend on, you know?
And I want to apologize for being a little bit late. We were delivering Christmas cards and Christmas presents to our clients here, so we got a little bit behind doing that. To work my way backwards, Kev, to answer your last question, yes, I do think there's a lot of new information that we can bring to the forefront when we start looking at Mothman. Mothman is, for me, one of those really, really unique.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. We're right on the break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Bring it. Yeah. What's up?
Well, it's been a quick one tonight. Hour number 2 on today's Kev Baker show, and it's like starting the second half of the show afresh. We've got our special guest. He's a good friend. He's Travis Shortt. You can hear us every Sunday over on Warrior Mode on the Kev Baker Show 1 channel on YouTube, and then it goes over onto the Bill Bean channel, because I'm still trying to get my bigger channel off the naughty step. Get wrestlers on, ex-professional wrestlers. We get Billy Idol's drummer?
Billy Joel.
Billy Joel, yes. Billy Joel's drummer, Liberty DeVito. We've had on Cheryl Jones from Coast to Coast as well. Stan Gordon. Lon Strickler. Yes, Lon's a great guy. I was over on his show. I played a little bit of that while I was waiting for you to arrive, Travis. And I tell you what, I don't like listening to myself. I don't think anyone likes listening to themselves. But I tell you, sometimes when I talk about that Loch Ness Monster, it almost sounds like I know what I'm talking about.
It does. It does.
That's when Dave Baker kicks in and he takes over. But listen, forget Dave Baker, forget Kev Baker. Take us into the wonderful world of the Mothman and how it was that you really got introduced to it all as well.
Introduced to it in a really, really bizarre way. I was in Las Vegas, Nevada, and my business partner and best friend at the time, Charlie McCracken, who passed away last year, he and I were in Rachel, Nevada, which is where Area 51 is. And we had stopped at the Area 51 Research Center, bought some souvenirs, and ended up with a book by Jerome Clark. And it had outlined various supernatural and paranormal events, cryptids, just a really, really cool book. I think it was like 365 unique and odd things. And one of those stories was about the Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And of course, I'm originally from Virginia. And when I say Virginia, people think D.C. or Virginia Beach in the U.S., but actually I'm from the part of Virginia which is down in the very southwestern tip of the state. So it's actually wedged between West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Carolina. So very, very deep into the Appalachian mountain chain. And West Virginia is not a very big state. And so Charlie and I were talking about how that, if we ever got the opportunity and the chance, we wanted to try to go to Point Pleasant and just investigate this Mothman phenomenon. Now that was in 2001. Fast forward to 2003, and we had sold the business that we were in together. We were managing partners of an advertising agency, PR firm. We sold that, and we started doing independent production work, marketing films, television commercials, things like that. And we were actually in Ashland, Kentucky, shooting a marketing film for a small Christian college. And one of Charlie's favorite things, this was 2003, so GPS systems, you had your Garmin and I don't know what the other one was, but you had dashboard mounted GPS, but they were expensive. So Charlie's big thing when we would do road trips is he would always stop at a convenience store, gas station, and pick up a map and see where we were in relation to other places. Could we find different roads back home? Always just very much an adventurer and taking journeys. And we found out that at that point we were only about 90 minutes from Point Pleasant, West Virginia. So at the time I was married, he was married. We called our wives and said, look, the trip has taken a little slight detour. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to Point Pleasant. So we drove into Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and started talking around. And at this time, this was 2003, so this would have been right after, as we were talking before the break, the Mothman Festival started in 2001. So this would have been about the second year of the festival. We were there in April of 2003, so about a year and a half into the festival. And we stopped at the convention, or the visitors center, and we were asking the woman there about the Mothman, and she laughed at us. And she was like, well, she goes, we really try to downplay the Mothman as much as possible, but there's some people on Main Street you can go talk to that really believe in this. So we went onto Main Street, and we met Carolyn Harris, who owned Harris's Steakhouse. We met Jeff Walmsley, who ran the Mothman Museum, and he and Carolyn were very instrumental in spearheading the Mothman Festival and the Mothman statue. And then we had dealt with Charlie Humphreys, who was economic development, and he was very instrumental in getting the historical aspect of the Mothman sightings brought to the forefront. And as we talked to these people, what really struck us was how sincere and still how traumatized they were some 40 years after the sightings. And we've talked about this on Warrior Mode a couple of times, Kev. You know, when you have individuals that have experienced something so traumatic as a UFO sighting or an abduction or a haunting, an exorcism, all those things, that PTSD stays with them. That never changes. And so talking to Linda Scarberry and Marcella Bennett and all of these other eyewitnesses, we saw 40 years of post-traumatic stress, that they were still dealing with this. They were still having a problem. And I've said this on the show, and we've talked about it in depth before, but it bears repeating. These were people that we had to seek out. We had to convince them to come and talk. They were still terrified. They were still traumatized by what they had experienced between 1966 and 1967 there in Point Pleasant. What they experienced was the sighting of a winged cryptid, a biped, 7 to 9 feet tall, red glowing eyes, and a massive wingspan. And these reports, these sightings came from all over the state of West Virginia in about a 100-mile radius from Point Pleasant and the surrounding areas, and multiple eyewitness accounts, incredible eyewitness accounts, doctors, lawyers, teachers, police officers. The original eyewitnesses were actually in their late teens, but on the tail end of their report with the police, all of these other sightings started occurring. And of course, John Keel, amazing paranormal not Freudian researcher, Fordian researcher.
Yes.
Fordian researcher, yeah, about a Freudian researcher. That takes us in a totally different kind of direction if we're doing that.
Still be a good show, though. Yeah,
it would be. Yeah, do Freudian analysis and Freudian analysis and see what. But the stories were so compelling that Keel began researching. He was there researching UFO sightings and the sightings of Men in Black. And Point Pleasant is just this very, very bizarre hotbed of paranormal activity. Haunted locations. One of the most haunted locations I've ever experienced was north of Point Pleasant, called the Lake State Hospital. Just absolutely overrun with paranormal activity. But we started talking to these individuals, we started researching, and what we really started seeing was that the sightings were really just kind of a small component of what had transpired in this town and in the lives of these people. So when we started doing the documentary, and at this point, this was 2003, we worked on the documentary for 6 years. We premiered it in 2009. But at that point, there never had been any feature-length investigative documentary. There had been segments there, Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack in the U.S. They had done a segment on it, and some of the other paranormal themed shows had done segments, but no one had taken an in-depth look and done the extensive historical research that I think we were able to do, and bringing in not just the cryptid side of things, but also the religious and the spiritual side, the Native American component, the ties to World War II, the government facility that was built where in the 40s that Mothman was seen in the 60s. So, and trying to bring all of these things into a coherent and cohesive story, and at the same time showing the human side of what had transpired and how it had impacted these people. And then also the economic side, how that this town was economically devastated for 4 decades with the collapse of the bridge, and that they were using Mothman now from a marketing and a tourism standpoint to actually bring people to this town. And actually, it's funny because I've done interviews like this, and I've done Coast to Coast, and I've done all of the supernatural and paranormal shows. But it was funny, back a few months ago, I got asked by our Rotary chapter here to present Mothman from a totally different perspective, and that was to talk about how that the town had used tragedy and turned it into tourism, and was able to now actually move forward with this huge economic impact that Mothman was having. So I've really looked at Mothman from just about every angle that you possibly could.
You know, as somebody that talks about woo and all this stuff all the time, I'm guilty of it. Most of the time, and if not all the time, we barely pause to think about the actual effects that it has on the witness, on the person who's giving us the account. So what was it like talking to people that were still, all these decades later, affected, Travis?
You know, for me, the most startling interview was Linda Scarberry, and Linda passed away in 2011, I believe. She was the one that it took us the longest to convince her to come on camera. And we actually took her, we met her at the Lowe Hotel in Point Pleasant and Harris's Steakhouse, and then we drove her back to the site of the TNT plant, which is where the original Mothman sighting took place on November 15th of 1966. And what I watched, I'm driving, and Charlie is in the passenger seat, and Linda and her daughter and son-in-law are in the back seat. And I'm watching her in the rearview mirror, and the closer we get to the TNT area, the more she begins to just kind of shrivel up and fold in on herself, and she begins to start fidgeting. And then we get there and we get out, and it's this was June or July, if I'm not mistaken, about 2004. And no, 2005, I'm sorry, 2005. And very hot, humid day, and she's shivering, and she's tearing up, and she's having a real problem in reliving and recreating the story. And there's actually, in the documentary, there's a scene that Charlie used where she and I are walking the perimeter of what's now the county fairgrounds, which is what they put there at the TNT area. And she and I are just walking and talking, and I had to do that to actually just to get her loosened up and wanting to talk. And so we weren't even really talking about Mothman when we were doing the perimeter walk, but Charlie uses that scene in the documentary as a segue to where she and I are actually talking. She teared up, she cried several times. The other individuals, for them mostly, it was just this, they tell the story and they're done. They don't really want to move forward. And the only thing I can liken it to was another documentary film that I worked on, Kev, which was called Simon Says, which was about Simon Leuenberg, who had survived 8 Nazi death camps during World War II, including Auschwitz. And his son had helped him write his autobiography, and he wanted a documentary to accompany it. And we sat and talked to Simon for weeks in Florida, getting him to relive the accounts, and for him to tell these stories about the different camps and the things that had happened. We'd have to take breaks and let him recuperate and recover, and then we could start back. And watching the Mothman sighting eyewitnesses reminded me a lot of that. That documentary I worked on in 2010 and 2011. So a couple of years after we finished the Mothman documentary, we moved on to Simon Says. But watching him was the closest thing that I've seen to watching these eyewitnesses talk about the trauma that they went through.
You know, that Simon Says documentary, that must have been harrowing just to listen to that.
It was, but you know, he was such a fun guy, and it was one of those things. And I know this isn't Mothman, but it's still a really good story. Simon passed away a few years ago, but we went to Florida. He was in Homestead, Florida, And we went and we were there, I think, three different trips for a couple of weeks. And we would meet him in the morning and we would do interviews. And then at lunchtime, and he would break at the same time. We had to follow his schedule. He'd break at the same time for lunch. And Kev, this man would put out a spread of food like you would not believe. There was jumbo shrimp. There was crab meat. There was all of these cold cut samples, cheeses, olives and grapes and strawberries and bottles of wine and bottles of vodka and bourbon, and he set up this huge, it was like attending a banquet.
Oh, now we're talking, man. Now we're talking.
And we would all break and we would sit and we would eat and have a few drinks and we would get back into but every day it was the same thing. And it was just one of the things that you learned from talking to him was that as many times as he faced the certainty of death in all of those camps, he was not going to live one day without living it to the fullest. And he chose to do that. He lived his life that way. He was an amazing, amazing man.
I tell you what, I need to check that documentary out. That sounds fascinating. Now,
Yeah.
to go back to the Mothman then, after speaking to these people, having worked on this for years, having thought about it for even longer,
Yes.
what do you pin it? What would you, if I was to pin you down? What is Mothman?
For me, and it's funny because all three of us, when we were working, because it was myself, Charlie McCracken, and my cousin Matthew Fleming, and Matthew and I did most of the research, and I wrote the script and dialogue. So I'm the on-camera host of the documentary. We all three had some very different opinions. Going into it, I thought cryptid. Matthew, whose background is in environmental science, he was much more leaning towards the fact that this was a mutation of some kind. The TNT area was used during World War II for the manufacturing and storage of trinitrotoluene, TNT. A lot of chemicals, a lot of volatile chemicals that are stored there, even to this day in the igloos. So he was leaning towards the fact that some of these chemicals might have caused some type of mutation in wildlife. Charlie, at the time, was much more leaning to it being a cryptid. The more research that I did, the more I talked to people, the more I heard their stories, and the more I researched what had been going on in Point Pleasant up to this point, the more I do believe, Kenneth, that what Mothman was some type of spiritual manifestation. Whether it's a demon, whether it is a Nephilim, I'm not exactly sure, but I do believe that there was a strong spiritual component to these sightings. And there's all kinds of stories that we got that, I mean, when we did the documentary, the first edit of the film was 4.5 hours. That's how much material we had gathered in 6 years of going up and doing recreations and doing interviews and talking to people and the research that we did. And we kept cutting it back and cutting it back and cutting it back. And finally, what we released was a 70-minute cut. So a little bit over 60 minutes makes a feature length. So we were able to say we did the first feature-length documentary on the Mothman sightings. But there were so many things that we didn't get to include, and that's one of the things that I really want to try to do with this relaunch of the documentary, is to give people the opportunity to have the original cut or the one that was released, but also try to go back to that original vision that we had of telling a very in-depth story, and then also either doing a second documentary, which was always planned. There were going to be two documentaries. There was Dark Wings, The Mothman Chronicles, and there was Dark Wings 2, The Dark Messengers. And that documentary was going to go straight into the spiritual and cultural references and impact that Mothman had had, and look at winged entities across various cultures and various religions and religious beliefs, from the Native Americans to the Mesoamericans.
Well, I was going to say that, Travis.
India.
These things aren't new, right? I mean,
No.
Flying entities, it didn't start with Point Pleasant, did it?
No, it didn't. And when you look at, and for years I spoke at the Mothman Festival on Sunday to close out the festival and close out the speakers, and I would always address the religious implications of the Mothman sightings. And to my knowledge, I was the first person to ever actually draw that conclusion. Everybody else had always gone to the cryptid side, the extraterrestrial or ultra-terrestrial side. And I would argue ultra-terrestrial and demonic maybe not that different. Interdimensional, not that different. But I was the first that I know of. And I remember asking Jeff Walmsley specifically about some of the religious imagery that people kept bringing up, and had anybody ever looked at the Mothman sightings from a religious angle and a religious standpoint? No one ever had. It was always just the crews would come in, they would do the interviews, they would shoot their footage, and they were gone. They were on to the next project. And that was one of the things that made our project so unique. Is it was a side project. We were doing it ourselves. There was no time frame. We were under no deadline, and we had complete control. So we could take this documentary in any direction that we wanted to go.
So what kind of religious kind of connotations and symbology are you talking here?
Well, when you look at any image of Mothman, and you pulled up Wikipedia and you showed that, and there's all kinds. You can Google Mothman images and you'll see all kinds of interpretations of Mothman. But if you look at Linda Scarberry's actual deposition, or not deposition, but her reporting of the sighting to the Point Pleasant police, what she described was a tall, slender, muscular man who was ashen in color, and he had red glowing eyes and what appeared to be angel wings protruding from his back, her words. So when you look at her description, and then you look at the various interpretations and what happened when the AP reported the story about the Mothman sightings and the collapse of the Silver Bridge, somebody dubbed it Mothman. And what happened then is you get these very, very insect-like, animal-like, moth-like depictions that is nowhere near the original description that Linda Scarberry gave.
Would you say that the statue is probably the closest? I mean, you've got the muscular aspect to it there,
It's got the muscular aspect.
Because when you look on Google Images, I mean, none of them exactly.
Well, and that's the weird thing, because when we were talking to these eyewitnesses, the three things that people always remembered was the height, the red glowing eyes, and the wings. Nobody, not one single eyewitness, could describe the facial features.
That's weird, huh?
It is. It's really strange. So, as far as, being more man-like, yeah, I would say the statue is closer in depicting what was probably seen, but it's still the wings are still very moth-like, still very insect-like,
not very angelic.
Not very angelic, and for Linda to give that description, that was one of the first things, and then one of the things that was happening. It gets into some murky water. There were 4 women that all became pregnant during the Mothman sightings. Linda Scarberry was one of them. And these women would have men in black appearing at their houses. And John Keel told these young mothers-to-be that if they wanted to keep the Mothman and the men in black at bay, they needed to have crucifixes in their homes, and the crucifixes needed to contain gold.
Whoa.
So, and Scarberry tells the story about one of her eyewitness accounts with men in black. She saw him, and she saw him out the corner of her eye as she was lighting a cigarette. And when she lit, I can't remember if it was matches or the lighter, but the flame caught the reflection of the crucifix on the wall, and the man in black disappeared like that.
Before you joined me, I was saying to people, doesn't matter what you believe in, whether it's hauntings, exorcisms, cryptids, men in black. There's something about the cross. There's something about saying the word Jesus, calling that name. Something about prayer that it really it has to lend some weight towards this being a spiritual or spiritual entities as opposed to a entity, because the men in black, they're as weird as, if not weirder than the Mothman.
Yes. And, as you well know, Kev, the concept of a man in black or a person in black stretches throughout history and throughout cultures.
Big thing.
And most often it is associated with a demonic presence, Satan, or something along those lines. Even Nathaniel Hawthorne in his writings in the early days of the U.S. would talk about young Goodman Brown, who met a gentleman dressed all in black in the woods.
Hold that thought. A man in black, all in the woods. Oh. Final segment of today's show, and folks, I will be here tomorrow night, the night before Christmas, and I'll just be reading strange, spooky, weird, Christmassy type stories. That's what it's going to be. Turn down the lights. Might even simulcast. I'll make a little Christmas grotto that we can all sit in. I'll have my pipe and my smoking jacket, and we'll take it away. But I've got Travis here for one more segment. We left him talking about a man in the woods, all in black. Travis, take us back there, man.
We did. Just, referencing that, as you've said, there's nothing new under the sun.
Nope.
We know that saying. It repeats, it reimagines itself. Men in black are part of all cultures and all history, as a matter of fact. I was just referencing one of my favorite authors is Nathaniel Hawthorne. One of my favorite short stories is Young Goodman Brown. And Young Goodman Brown is, of course, a personifying the piety and the religious fervor of New England. And he goes into the woods to meet a man dressed all in black, who then shows him the seedy underbelly of colonial New England America, including things such as witches' covens and young girls who were giving birth to babies and basically aborting them, killing them, burying them in the gardens. And it's a tragic story. And some people are probably listening going, why is that one of his favorites? Well, because it shows all of these, the hypocrisy of organized religion, but it also shows the depth to which Young Goodman Brown has love and faith in humanity until the last of the story, because his wife's name is Faith, and the last line of the story is that he shrank from the bosom of faith. And I think that is a powerful image when we're talking about imagery such as organized religion and spirituality and things like that. We talked about the crucifixes. The winged entities, Kev, you look at, in Mesoamerica, you have Quetzalcoatl, the winged serpent who brought knowledge. You've got angels in the Bible. You've got angels in the Quran. You've got the Sphinx in Egypt, a winged entity. All of these cultures and all of these belief systems show us individuals, entities with wings. Now, there are those that think that the wing imagery is an allegory, that they're able to fly, that they don't really fly, but it allows for them to have come from a higher, loftier place. But I'm not so sure about that. I think that it has much more of a real connotation to what these people were seeing. Because again, what we're looking at is the artistic depiction of what people have seen. And from cave walls to comic books, we draw exactly what we see. We don't really embellish all that much when it comes to what we see.
I'm with you, brother. I'm with you. It really is. It takes a different turn altogether when you start to open up to the historic side of this. It really does. And, we were talking during the break about the way we refer to entities, be it the Loch Ness Monster, Mothman. And I think you're right. You said to me during the break, you try not to call it a cryptid because, this isn't your typical cryptid. This is something completely different, isn't it?
It is. And one of the things that I found really fascinating about Mothman is you take a look at most paranormal phenomena, especially concerning entities. You've got a picture of the Loch Ness monster, one of the most famous. Now it's been debunked and proven false, but you have it. It's there. Same thing with the 68 Patterson tape of Bigfoot. Same thing with UFO sightings. All of these things, there's an image that someone's captured. What fascinated me was that in the original eyewitness sightings of Mothman, not one single photograph was ever shown. It was passed verbally. It was people were just telling and they were describing, and people were then people were seeing a similar entity. Like I said, there were about 100 eyewitness sightings, some of them taking place simultaneously when they came in. So, and these were miles and miles apart. So
if that's a UFO, I mean, if you've got multiple people seeing things, that totally adds credibility and something different.
It does. And then you look at the story, and actually there had been a sighting about 6 years earlier in the early 1960s. A mother and son saw what they called, again, their words, and this is in John Keel's book, Mothman Prophecies, they saw what they dubbed an angel in their barn.
I urge anyone out there, if you're like me and you're a slow reader as well, Audible, they've got the Mothman Prophecies, and the person reading that is one of these really good ones, and it's just, you get absorbed into it.
And it's not, and I tell people the Mothman Prophecies is not an easy book to read because it has no continuity.
Well, it's funny because I had to keep going back. I had to keep bookmarking, going back, and then, like you say, putting the puzzle back together again. Yeah. But I suppose, looking at the way I research things, the way I do shows every night, moving from one topic to the other, going back to something I talked about 3 weeks ago, it actually kind of sits well with the way my own mind works. So maybe that's why I got so into it,
Well, it's one of those things, if you read it, if you go into it knowing that what you're basically reading is a journal of things that Keel was investigating, and every now and then he makes a connection. But if you go into it thinking you're going to read a chapter 1 that has an introduction, and then everything builds on that first chapter, that's just not the way it works.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. I thought I was getting a story. A to Z, we're going to take it on a journey. No. But I think that adds to it. I do think it adds to it.
It's a journey, all right. It's a journey into Keel's head, but it's not an easy road to follow.
No, definitely not. Now, talking Mothman, obviously, Point Pleasant, it's what you researched for the documentary. Have you been keeping an eye on the shenanigans in Illinois? Now, I know we've mentioned this over with Lon before.
Yes.
Are we looking at something similar, in your opinion? Are we looking at something different? Is it more... We're in the age of the internet now, and like clowns come along every now and again. You get the...
I miss the clowns.
So do
actually.
I mean, the clowns would have been really apt this year, wouldn't they?
Yes.
Very much.
I try to stay on top of the sightings and what's going on, and especially with Lon now, anytime he shares something, I try to share it to the Darkwings Facebook page so that the stories are there.
He's talking to a lot of people that work in and around the airports.
Mm-hmm.
And again, when it's people that are used to seeing things in the sky, they're used to aviation, when these people are saying there's something weird being seen, for me, again, interest peaked.
Yes. And I'm the same way. The more professional and more credible, to some degree, the eyewitnesses are. I have been following what Lon posts. I'm following Chicago. Chicago has been a hotbed for a few years now with Mothman sightings.
Yeah.
For a while, it was Texas. There was a lot of sightings in and around Wise County, Texas, which ironically is home to Aurora, Texas, which had the UFO crash in Aurora, Texas in 1897, 50 years before Roswell. So there, again, kind of a UFO tie-in there. But what I've enjoyed, and Nick Redfern has a book on monsters in America, and he's got an entire section on winged entities. And there was a rash of sightings in Texas in the 60s. They called it a Batman. And then in Vietnam, you had some soldiers that had reported seeing a moth woman. She was pitch black in color, totally naked, no clothing, and was flying over top of their camp.
Whoa, wait a minute. You're talking about a Mothman?
Excuse me, it's ma'am.
Yes, indeed. Excuse me,
Mothman,
it's
yes.
ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah, no, you know what? I was talking. We were looking at a Bigfoot report from Vietnam not long ago. That had been reported in the midst of a battle. They came across this thing. Very, very interesting. So, what do you put it down to then? Why Illinois? Why now? Does there have to be a reason, do you think?
Well, I don't think that there has to be a reason. I think, in Point Pleasant, that's, for me, it is a bizarre situation in itself. It's not a high populated area. Matter of fact, the town's population is almost identical today as it was in 1966. It's not grown or really diminished. It's just kind of plateaued and leveled out. There is something interesting, and I think Lon and I touched on this when he was on Warrior Mode that one night. There does seem to be, for whatever reason, there seems to be a connection between these winged entity sightings and bodies of water. And of course, in Chicago, that's the Great Lakes area. You've got a lot of water there. Point Pleasant is situated on the Ohio, actually at the convergence of the Ohio and the Kanawha. So there seems to be something about water. And, we talked about this on one of the Warrior Mode shows, that water does play a role in most religions and most spiritual observances and worships. Water seems to be a very, very sacred image and symbol. So maybe there's something to do with that. The other thing, of course, is the Chicago area, much like Point Pleasant, as was most of this country, at one time, very, very, very steeped in Native American families and blood and mythology and culture. And I think, I'm not so sure that, when we look back at some of the Native American, I mean, there's if I can remember, there's a term. Actually, the Native Americans have a term for winged people. There's a because I looked into it when we were looking at the Native American impact on Mothman. I want to say it's the Wykando is the term that they use. I'll have to look that one up. But it's a race of entities that Native American people realized existed. They were winged entities that the Native Americans revered and worshipped.
I was trying to see if I could find the name of it for you there, but no.
You know what? I know exactly how to find it real quickly.
Is it the Ho Chunk?
It's not that one.
No.
That's another one. It's actually, there was a horror movie in the late 90s, early 2000s called It Waits, and they used this particular Native American myth as the basis of the horror film.
My friend Nacy from the Anishinaabe tribe will be throwing things at his computer right now. He'll be going, Kev, I've told you this a bajillion times.
You know what this is, Kev?
Yep. Just can't put my tongue on it. That's what it is.
And if I hadn't been running late, I would have already had my notes and everything in front of the laptop while I was getting ready.
Being late is on time in my world. I tell you, it just is. No, I can't find it here. When I think about the Chicago area as well, I'm not saying this is connected, but it's something that sticks out for me. I mean, that place is like the Wild West.
Yes.
Obviously, I say that with them. I'm not being insensitive to anyone if you may be in that area, because there's a lot of battles every weekend there, shall we say, that
Yes.
results in multiple lives being lost. And I sometimes wonder if that plays into it. Again, I don't think that's the reason for it being seen there, but at the same
Well,
time, we're dealing with something we just don't know, you know?
well, exactly. And I think, and I can't find it right now, Kevin. I apologize. I'll message it to you. So
When you look at the mayor of Chicago, Lightfoot or Clubfoot as I call her, I mean, that looks like a walking, talking Mothman. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, I'm just saying.
Well, and I think, you look at Chicago, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of things going on there. It is, I think, Mothman, these winged entities, I think they can appear in areas that are steeped heavily with negative emotion. And Chicago is an area known for a lot of negativity, a lot of negative energy. And I think, I don't know if these things are drawn to it, if they feed on it, if they cause it. And that's always been one of the theories about Mothman. Did Mothman cause the collapse of the Silver Bridge? I don't know. I know the official explanation as to why the bridge collapsed, but did Mothman play a role in it? Was there something? Was he there as the harbinger of doom? Was he there as the death angel? Was he there as the grim reaper? There's all of these questions that people have, and and that's one of the things in the book and in the movie, The Mothman Prophecies with Richard Gere and Laura Linney, that the John Keel character in that movie, John Leake, explains that these entities are seen in places where where something tragic happens. Now, does that mean they're there to cause it? Does that mean that they are there to warn? What are they? There were reports of a winged entity between the two towers on 9/11. I've seen the photograph.
Yeah.
It's floated around. I've seen it. There's reports, of course, Mothman the bridge. There were reports of Mothman winged entity sightings at Chernobyl before the meltdown there. So, for me, the question becomes, what are these things? And then, for me, when we were doing the documentary and when we were looking at Mothman, I think the real true story of the Mothman sightings is the tenacity of human nature. That here you have a town, this bridge collapsed, 46 people lost their lives. They were economically devastated. You go to Point Pleasant, and I've said this in almost every interview that I do. Most of your economic development is on the Ohio side of the Ohio River. In Gallipolis, Ohio. On the West Virginia side, it's all local mom and pop businesses, not a lot of franchises, not a lot of chain restaurants, everything. They had to sustain themselves. And for this town to lose the bridge, and the bridge that connected them with Ohio, that was the main thoroughfare for product distribution. It was the main thoroughfare for tourism, people coming in and out of West Virginia from the Midwest area. It was a huge, huge economic impact for them when this bridge collapsed. And it was 10 years before another one was reconstructed. So they had to sustain themselves. And I mentioned that the population is almost exactly the same as it was in 1966. Well, you're looking at, what is that, 54 years?
Long time, man.
54 years. And this town, in a lot of other situations, this town may have just died and become one of those ghost towns that you drive through and go, well, what used to be here? But they survived, and they were able to thrive in some ways. And the Mothman Festival, and I hope they have it this year. I plan on going if they do. If they have the festival, that brings 10 to 20,000 people to the little town of Point Pleasant. That's almost increasing their population 4 times.
You know, where I'm from, Fort Augustus, if it wasn't for the Loch Ness Monster, I really seriously doubt there would be anything there.
Mm-hmm.
Tourism is the #1 bread and butter way of making a living up that way. We used to have the Forestry Commission up there, but that got sold off, that got done away with. The hydroelectric, they employ a handful of people, you know, getting in the door, it's who you know, not what you know. So without the whole monster thing, I totally can appreciate where you're coming from. And some people have said to me, well, is that what it's all about then? It's just to get people here. And I know it's easy to think that for some people, but there is something there, and it would be idiotic for somewhere like Fort Augustus or Point Pleasant not to try and use that, you know, to stimulate interest in the area, bring people in there. And at the heart of it, Loch Ness, I mean, people are seeing something. No matter what anyone believes out there, people have seen something, and when you speak to them, you know, it's quite similar to the way that Travis talks. Maybe not as long-lasting an effect, but my mum mentioned in a recording that I made of her talking about a story, and she talks about how me and her, anytime we hear this particular story about the area, it's a kind of devilish type story, but we kind of go wide-eyed. We get kind of thrown back because it takes us back to hearing these stories from the first time. So that sounds similar to the kind of mark that it leaves on people, you know. And I've never seen the entities that I've had described to me, but they've still affected me because I heard them when I was a child. So yeah,
it's one of those things. It gets into our system. It gets into our our DNA, our makeup when we hear these stories. And every almost every locale, Kev, has something like a Loch Ness monster or a Mothman or a Bigfoot. You know, I told you growing up in Virginia, I heard stories about Bigfoot on television and things like that. You know, only in the past couple of decades has there been this introduction of our version of Bigfoot in that area called the Wood Booger, and he looks just like Bigfoot.
I like that, the Wood Booger. I like
the Wood
that
Booger.
Yeah.
He there's a big statue of him. I got a picture.
Does it eat chicken? Does it eat chicken?
Probably.
It has to, right? It has to be, man. It has to be.
Oh, but we all have it. You've got the swamp ape in Florida. You've got Bigfoot. You've got Sasquatch. You've got the abominable snowman. You've got Mothman.
The wild man of the UK.
Wild man.
Yeah.
There's a goat man in Kentucky. Dog man. I mean, we all have those things, and there's legends, there's stories, but they're born out of something.
Yep.
They come from somewhere.
Yep.
And the Mothman story for me, I love it. I love hearing people tell the story when I go to Point Pleasant. I loved watching my 16-year-old daughter. I loved watching her experience Point Pleasant through her eyes and her friends and letting them meet the people that I've met and that I talked to in the past 2 decades and interview them. And for her to experience it and to have her own feelings, and we had her on the show not long after we came back from Point Pleasant, and let her talk a little bit about that experience. But again, it does come down for me. The fundamental truth is, just like with UFO sightings and hauntings and possessions and things like that. Looking into someone's eyes and you hear them tell the story, if they're telling you the truth or they're trying to sell you a load of crap.
Yeah.
And what I watched in these eyewitnesses was trauma and terror and, like I said, PTSD. And I watched how it impacted them. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that every one of those people that I interviewed saw something. Don't know what it was. I've given my theory as based on what they told me. I didn't see it. I've never seen Mothman. Closest I've come is that one image that I've shared with you and Bill.
And
that was still
very intriguing.
Yeah, it is.
Yep. That's still very ambiguous for me.
It is. I haven't closed the chapter on that.
No, I wouldn't.
And speaking of, I plan on putting it Bill's book, which we got to plug real quickly. Bill's
Yes,
got
we
Stranger
do.
Fiction
Stranger
2.
in Fiction 2, that's correct. Now you've guilted me into writing my chapter as well.
I know. Oh, please.
I was
you gotta
happy
go-
the other night when I heard you saying the 1st of January. I thought, excellent, that gives me a few extra days.
Yeah, there's no way that I'm going to have it
Travis,
before.
listen, we're 3 minutes from the end.
Yes.
Let people know where they can follow you. Obviously, I would hope everyone knows about Warrior Mode, but let them know anyway.
Warrior Mode Sunday night, 7 to 9 p.m. with Kev and Bill on Kev's show, and then it's archived on Bill's YouTube. You can find me on Facebook, Travis Shortt, 2 T's in Short. You can also look Dark Wings, the Mothman Chronicle on Facebook. There's a page there. Please go like, share anything that's on it. And also there is a website forthcoming. I've got it registered. It's darkwingsmothmanmovie.com, I believe.
Oh, I like it. I like it.
So
That means we'll
there'll
need to
be-
get you
you'll be
back
able
on
to-
then when you're putting that out.
Yes,
Yeah.
we get that up there and get it, and there'll be opportunities to order the DVD. And like I said, there's going to be 2 versions of the DVD, and then also movie posters and some other things that you can do. But
Travis, man, we are just like over a week away from 2021. I promise you, for every bit as weird that 2020's been, just you wait until you see 2021.
you know, we talked about this on Warrior Mode. There is, and I know we've got like a minute and a half. There is this build up in spiritual energy right now. Something is about to happen.
Yep, the lid is about to blow
It
off
is.
the spiritual pot. That's right. So stay tuned, folks. Stay tuned for Lucky coming up with Quantum Connections. We'll be back tomorrow with a very Christmassy. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and I'm going to spook the heck out of you. That's right. So please join me for that tomorrow night. If you can't make it tomorrow, and I know tomorrow for Australians is actually Christmas Day, have a very nice Christmas when it arrives. And I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Don't go anywhere.
Kev, Merry Christmas to you and your family and to everyone watching.
Thank you very much, brother. Same to you, and same to all of you out there, wherever you are. Make it TFR and get in touch.